So there were five tests that Porter had, tests uh, of an excellent strategy. And these were chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the book. And I know I've asked you to read that, as well as to finish the other What is Strategy book. But he said he gets to this point as a result of discussing with you the five forces that all negatively impact profitability. And he wants to get a tool that'll help us to move past, either to avoid or to offset the effects of those five forces. And the way he said to do that was through the value chain. And we're going to go back through that here in a few of these slides. But the idea behind the use of the value chain is to try and compare all the steps that your specific company uses in its value chain as it relates to the specific uh, steps that all of the other companies in aggregate as an industry group take. And your idea is to offset your um, your value chain as opposed to the system, the value system, so that you are hitting them. This is a term I'm going to use next class, next week. You want to hit them where they ain't. You want to set up your positioning so you don't go head to head, but you're moving around on either side of where the competition might be. And the way that begins is with a distinctive or unique value proposition. The second test of the excellence strategy is a different tailored value chain, and that's what I just said. Your tailored value chain puts you into the spaces where there's room uh, between the elements of your competitor's value system, so that you can find a way to make some money. The third thing is to have clear trade-offs, and that's choosing what you do, recognizing that when you're doing that, you are automatically foregoing some customers, that you're telling some customers to go away. And you have to choose not only what you will do to beat the customers you want to keep, but also what you have to do, what you have to not do to keep from dulling the uh, the way you've honed the cutting edge of your own strategy. And I have a little trouble coming up here. I think I got caught on the 15 too, Herman. So I'm going to be a little shaky here for the first few items we talk about. So number four is all the activities in your value chain have to fit together and reinforce one another. And that's kind of obvious. So we want to make sure that we do, as we do something, take an action or give a policy that it is supportive of the other actions and policies in the company. And then finally, Porter points out that strategic continuity, and this is using one of my favorite words, which is consistency. Continuity and consistency would be synonyms here. Strategic consistency with continual improvement in realization of results. So that's what we're going to go through then, is look at these five tests individually. And to do that, the framework on which I'm going to do this is Southwest Airlines. And since you know a little bit about it, having had that case before Easter, and I hope you didn't forget everything over the Easter holiday. So let's look at creating a distinctive value proposition. And what I'm going to use here is three statements that I have shown you in a diagram that I showed you twice at least. This will be the third time I've shown it. And they are, you have to decide, the first thing you got to do to get a distinctive value proposition is decide which customers you want. And you've got to do some kind of market segmentation to determine which ones you want. Now, I know you all have heard and maybe have used the term market segmentation in your marketing class. And so we can find all different ways to define who customers may be, potential customers might be. We can do it on the basis of age, income level, education, gender, ethnicity, um, certain kinds of preferences that they have, whether they have professional degree or are a tradesman or are not working at all. So we can come up with all kinds of ways to segment the market, but we'd like to have some system that will help us to do that. And then we want to look for, as we're doing that, we want to look for two different groups. One of those is those who are currently overlooked or possibly where they're avoided. Now, if we look at Southwest Airlines, prior to their arrival on the scene, the vast majority of the people in this country were overlooked because up until the time of Southwest came along, the people who flew either were businessmen who had a very big budget or perhaps vacationers, but they were taking the once in a lifetime type trip because it was so expensive that this was not something that, if you will, quote, ordinary people, close quote, would be able to do. So all of those people that fall into the condition of being ordinary, like I suspect all of us are in this meeting today, were overlooked. And in other cases, there are people that are just plain avoided because they don't lend themselves to being profitable customers. The second thing we have to do is to determine which needs of these customers are not being met. And these are customers who are either being overserved or underserved. And if we take very ordinary people and look at Southwest again, if you were flying another airline, you would be overserved because those other airlines were what they call full service airlines, where they gave you a lot of stuff. I ended up one time with a bag of about 60 or 70 decks of cards. They used to give you a deck of card if you wanted to use that on the plane or sitting in the uh, clubhouse that they have on some of the large cities. Each airline has a place where you can go get out of the crowd and have a cup of coffee or a sandwich. And they also had the cards available there. So I got a whole bunch of those cards. And so I was being overserved because I was paying for that someplace in the mix. Also, they had plenty of magazines and a kind of a bookcase where you could get them as you got on the plane. You could get a blanket to cover over yourself to keep yourself warm if you wanted to go to sleep on that long flight. There are all kinds of things that were part of the full service airlines that cost money that provided an overservice. I want to get there cheap, and that's the way most people are. This is the key determinant of travel is the least expensive. Or there are people who are underserved, and this same group, all us ordinary people, were underserved because we couldn't find something that would meet our budget, and as a result, we couldn't use the plane. The third thing we have to look at is what kind of price. And you remember, if you remember way back in the beginning of this course, I said that one of the startling things that we were going to say about marketing is we want to create products that are the least capable products that people are willing to pay for. And that's this idea of just enough, that we want to base our product on just enough to satisfy the customer's need, not to give them something extra that they would have to pay for, but might not necessarily want, or at least not want to pay for. So eliminate all the unnecessary where the customers are overserved and add to where the customers are underserved. So those three things are what are going to help us determine for a vision statement uh, what our unique value is going to be. Now, this is the chart that I've shown you at least twice, maybe three times already. And I want to get this up out of the way. So we'll put it up here at the top. And these are the same three questions that I had on the preceding slide. What customers? Who are going to be the end users? If we're involved in something where we're going to be doing multiple steps of distribution before we get to the end user, what channels are we going to be using? And this is the process of market segmentation. The second thing, and you notice that these are all connected with arrows, indicating that this is kind of a moving target. That as you define one of the three, it'll help you define the other two of those three key questions. The second question in blue is which needs. How do you define what that product is going to look like? What features are you going to offer? What services are going to be offered with it? Now, in the case of Southwest, everything, the features that people want is not, they want to have features they don't have to pay for. And so if it's something that you would have to pay for to get it, take it out. Don't want to pay for it. But you can define the product in the way that you meet the needs of the customers. And what we're looking for is customers with common needs. And as I go through this talking about Southwest, what's interesting is that they ultimately chose to serve two classes of customers. One of them is the bus rider, who could care less whether the plane is on time or not. All they wanted to do is be cheap. But they also have chosen to serve businessmen or business people who do travel for business. And they want to make sure they get there on time. They don't care that much about price, but they like the idea of frequent flights because they've got more options to get to where they need to go on time. So these are seemingly two kinds of customers that have divergent needs, and yet Southwest has been able to find, by doing their market segmentation, that the two are compatible in the respect that they want, and they want to have frequent flights. They want to be able to get there on time, which is not important to the bus rider, and they don't really care about price that much, which is something that is of great concern to the bus rider. So it's a kind of an odd combination, but they make it work. The third thing is, again, looking at this chart, is the relative price. And what would our customers want? Are they willing to pay a premium price? Well, in the case of Southwest, they're not. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons that the idea of a one and now two bags free is so appealing, because it helps significantly to reduce cost. And people like the idea of that lower price. In other cases, it would be parity, which would be the same price. And of course, because their costs are so much lower than anyone else because of a sum of a lot of things that they're doing, Southwest really is in the catbird seat for how they price their product. The other guys can't bring their prices low enough because they haven't matched up the needs of their customers as closely as Southwest has with the offering that the other companies, make. So part of the relative pricing is looking at who's overserved and who's underserved and coming in with pricing that's just enough. So I'm going to look at one aspect of Southwest's potential customer base. And we recognize here, so we're going to look at some of the potential customers and what they need. Some customers want luxury flying. They do want that blanket on them over when they get tired. They do want food, and they'd like to have it served with a linen tablecloth and with actual real china. They want plenty of leg room and other things of that kind of thing that represent luxury flying. And they're willing to pay for it. There's some people who want cheap fares. There's some that want frequent flights. I just pointed out the uh, conflict in the two that Southwest ultimately selected, that the bus rider wants the cheap fares and the business rider wants to get frequent flights that get there on time. Some people prefer to fly out of convenient airports. And of course, that's where Southwest is. And there's some reasons for that. And we'll see those. So can we develop a unique product for some of these potential customers? By definition, we are not interested in serving all customers, all potential customers. We're interested in selling profitable customers. So how can I add value for these potential customers? And that is through the value chain. And what the value chain does is it lays out what the industry does, how the business industry approaches their business. And I know Diana and Jessica would both tell you that the examples they gave were representative of that entire industry. What IBM was doing, how they were running their business, was very similar to the way the other companies in the industry ran their businesses as well. In fact, there were altogether there were 8 companies that were making computers back in the day when IBM was clearly the king with, as you said, Diana, I think you said it, that they had 95% of the market. And
Yes,
they,
IBM.
yeah, and they ended up being sued at one point because they had such a dominant position by the 7 other companies in the industry. And those were big companies. They were, and you'll know some of them, General Electric, Control Data, which is a company I worked for at one time, Sperry Rand, which is still a big company, RCA, that was Radio Corporation of America. They made computers. There was Burroughs Corporation, um, Honeywell, and what's the 7th one? Well, I'm not going to hold it up for the sake of the one, but they were called because they were all suing IBM together, and IBM was such a clean and profitable company. It was called the suit of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. So IBM was Snow White, and the other 7 dwarfs were all the other companies that couldn't get their way along in business because IBM had really closed them out. Well, they settled that suit later on, and maybe that'll be something we'll talk about in a future uh, uh, lecture. So what Porter says is lay out your business as the value chain, all the things that make it up, and compare that to what the industry itself is doing. So this steps by step shows how the industry does business. And as I started to indicate, IBM and all the other dwarfs, the 7 dwarfs, did things the same way. And in the auto companies, Ford, whom you specifically referenced, Jessica, and all the others did business the same way. They all tried to be fully integrated, making all of the components and therefore controlling the product from beginning to end. And what we would want to do is to lay out our distinctive value proposition against that value system and see where we fit along that value system. And what we would do is then look to see how we can deliver our offering either in a way that was different from our competition. And you can see this, you will be able to see this if you go through the exercise of laying out how an industry is put together. And he says, Porter says that if you have a distinctive value chain, you got a good shot at being real effective. So the tailoring takes place by matching up each of the things you do against what the competitors do. And that is match up your value chain against the value system of the industry. So you remember what I showed you? I hope you remember, because this is back before Easter, that we said that there is a value system, and that was everything from the mine to the pantry. The mine is where the raw materials are dug out of the ground or somehow derived in their most elemental fashion. The pantry is the ultimate user. And everything else takes place with multiple transactions, sometimes within a company, and sometimes with the transaction taking place between company, with a person who's a raw material provider providing something in exchange for money, to the next step up where they do a conversion of that raw material, and then they in turn sell it to the next step up where somebody customizes that product at the next step up. And there could be multiple steps. I think I said that in fact with the auto industry, when they were trying to negotiate, and they were successful at doing this incidentally, when they negotiated the new trade agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico, where when that's in effect, there are no tariffs going back and forth between those three countries. You could have the components in an automobile change ownership up to about 70 times in the course of taking it from a elemental component up to the final finished car. Now, we only occupy a small piece of the value chain, and so does Southwest. They don't build their own planes. They don't extract fuel from the ground. And when it comes to the selling side, they get pretty close to the customer. But there are some other steps in there that might make the whole program a little more attractive to the customer. So what we have the capability of doing is moving ourselves up and down this chain, this system rather, with our value chain. An example of this is in the manufacture of tin cans. And I talked to you a little bit about how Primerica actually had come out of a company that did make metal containers, that made tin cans. And in talking to you about strategy, I said there are times that you might integrate, well, and it may be something we'll get to see today, so I may be a little ahead of myself. But if somebody looks upstream, and that is moving more toward the mine, if we look up at here, we may find that that guy's making too much money. And so we might want to integrate backwards with our value chain to try and take a piece of his action. And this is what Campbell Soup did. They make a huge number of cans for their canned soups, and they saw that they could make more money if rather than buying their cans, they manufactured themselves. So they went up market, upstream, opened up their own canning lines, and are the largest single user of metal cans in the world. Sometimes it's where you go downstream. Now we're going to find when we get to Dell, there was a period of time where rather than just being a factory manufacturer, they also moved forward into the retail marketplace because they saw there was opportunity to sell at retail through retail stores. So that was moving downstream. And companies will do that to try and find the best place to hook themselves up on the value system. So I'm going to go take one more slide, and then we're going to stop for a couple of minutes and get your input. What we want to do is create our product at or below the customer's WTP, the willingness to pay. And in making a product, what we come up with our costs, it's the total cost is the sum of the costs incurred at each transaction in the value system. And that transaction may be an actual sale and purchase of a component going through the system, or it may be merely an accounting uh, entry that moves a product that's being fabricated in a factory, and that finished product is then moved into an inventory in the same factory building. That is a transaction, and every one of those transactions represents an opportunity to reduce cost. So as long as the sum of all of those costs is equal to or less than the WTP, a transaction can take place. And that's where I'm going to stop now, is looking at this arrow, which you've seen before, and I imagine you saw it in other classes before this one. And it deals with seemingly the component component areas at a 30,000 foot level that are pretty much prevalent in every company. The bottom half of it represents what I call line activities. That's where people do the work. Inbound logistics is receiving all the materials to make the product. Operations is the converting of that into a finished product. Outbound logistics is the distribution system. Marketing and sales is the vehicle that allows that outbound transaction to take place. And service is the aftermarket things that you do to keep customers happy. Training, warranties, fixing broken items. Those are all doing type functions. The upper half of that is the support activities. And that's a firm's infrastructure, just to look at it. The top line is the whole thing. But you can see that these top lines, the light green, all are things that are applicable across the whole organization and are not particular to operations, for example. As long as all of the costs incurred in this part of that arrow are less than the willingness to pay, which is the point on the arrow, that means the transaction can take place because there's a margin. The total cost is less than the amount that the customer wants to pay. So I think I've got two diamonds that show up on this. Yeah, there they are. And what we do with this is we try and cut the costs or improve the value. So I'm going to stop here for a minute. But Ryan, as you said, this is where we want to do some exercise of finding some cost reductions. And one of them that would seem logical to do that in would be in the area of procurement. And if we look at Southwest specifically, one of the things that we said where the 5 forces impacted a company like Southwest is that the suppliers had a great deal of supplier power. You know, if you don't want to buy your Boeing plane, where are you going to go? The only other place you can go is Airbus. So they've got a lot of power for setting prices and also establishing the terms and conditions under which they'll sell the product to you. But Southwest can reduce that by an element in their value chain of buying all their products from Boeing, and therefore they'll get a parking place close to the Boeing office when they fly up to Seattle to go see them. So they've offset some of the power that the supplier had. Correspondingly, in operations, all of the sum of the things that they do really give a lot of opportunity for reducing costs in operations. Now, not only did we say the suppliers have a lot of power in the airline industry, but they represent about 80% of the costs. And anything you're going to do to reduce the remaining costs which is you're only working with 20% of the total cost, is going to fall right to the bottom line. And so it's very important that you spend a lot of time looking at operations in the case of a Southwest to see how you can cut costs out. And we know what some of those are. I raised a question here. I said earlier that the two markets that Southwest goes after would seem to be incompatible, but they make it work. There's the company, people that want cheap fares, and the people who are business travelers who want frequent flights. In order to be successful in doing this, they have to have some trade-offs. And what the trade-offs allow you to do is to make sure that you're offering what your customers want and not offering anything that would cost money that your customers don't want. And by definition, it means you've got to disappoint some customers. And you have to be willing to accept that up front. And this third line here is one of my favorite words, focus. We must accept that there are customers we can't serve and remain laser focused on the people we can serve. So let's look at I'm going to look at one set of activities and show you here in operations where you could have a difference. And this is only one of several that we could look at with Southwest. And this is the reason that so many of your classes, business classes, will use a Southwest case study or discuss Southwest in detail, because they've done such a marvelous job of defining and honoring the strategic elements that they put together. So if we take the basic premise that they want to have quick turnaround. Now, one thing it'd be nice to know is that people will do quick turnaround, that the typical time for an airline is about 45 minutes to an hour. And it would be nice to think that Southwest said, look, we're just going to do it for 15 minutes. But they didn't think about that initially. It happened because they almost went broke. They were losing money and they had 3 airplanes in their fleet, and they had to sell one of them to get money for payroll. So what they determined was, with only 2 planes, the only way they could make money was to keep those 2 planes in the air more hours per day. And the only way they could do that was to do a turnaround in 15 minutes. So they worked up a way to do that in this time when they were really broke. And then we're able to say, okay, we did it with this, let's just keep on doing it. And so thereafter, they use that as a marker that they want to be able to turn that plane around in 15 minutes. So what does this do for them? Well, part of what they did, or what they chose to do, is they went into these second-tier airports because those are cheaper to work out of, number one. But also there's a lot less opportunity for flight congestion, air traffic. And that's one of the 3 things that really can impact your ability to do a quick turnaround. The second is mechanical, and the third is weather. So for me, looking at this as a customer, I would far rather drive to Ontario, even Palm Springs, as opposed to going into LAX. That's a fate worse than death. More frequent flights. The quick turnaround allowed for more flights per day. And what that does is you keep those planes full and keep them in the air. It gives you low cost per available passenger mile. And Jessica and Diana, this is all about selling why you want to get up to capacity, because you've got those high fixed costs and you want to be able to cover those and allow the variable costs to work for you to improve your profitability. One class of service. This improves quick turnaround because you get people on that plane quick. And you don't have any arguments about who gets what seat. And since you don't have to give that attention to your passengers, you could have a smaller crew size, and that reduces costs. No meals. All of their quick turnaround locations are short hops, and there's not enough time to effectively give meals. And that saves on food costs, and again, helps reduce crew size. No assigned seating. This means quicker boarding. Quicker boarding means quick turnaround. But these are things, not only are there the trade-offs as a result of going for quick turnaround, but they also illustrate fit, because they show how each of these supports the other things on this in this slide. No interline transfer fees. Don't really need them. You're going point to point on your flying, not going out of a hub. They're all short flights, which means you probably are not carrying the baggage you need for a safari, but probably just for a 2 or 3 day trip, or even if you're going for a week and a half as a bus rider, you know how to pack so that you don't have to carry a lot of luggage. I think I may have told you there was a kid, a young man up in Scotland that got on the plane, and there was a flight where they had to pay for their bags if they checked them. And what he did is he took no bag at all. He took all of his clothes and put it on in multiple layers. And he had 9 layers of clothing on. And he got so overheated, he had heat prostration. So, you know, he saved some money on the baggage, but probably ended up having to pay for emergency room visit. So the fact that their passengers don't really have that much baggage, and the fact that they can demonstrate, hey, we're saving you money because we don't have to pay other airlines to handle it. And we'll give you a bonus here. You get to carry your bag for free. So that's supported too. They use one type of plane. This means lower maintenance costs, smaller crews, because you can do multiple tasks when you are familiar with the only plane in the fleet. The result of making just this one thing is a tailored value chain. It's one where they've tried to carve out as much of the cost, in this case in the operations, as possible. So the question we did have to ask is, does this meet the needs of our chosen market segment? Well, I'm not even going to answer that question because I can't remember the answer. But point number 3, remember we have 5. Number 3 is trade-offs. This is the linchpin. This is what stops competitors. If you look at all of the things that Southwest does, a competitor could copy some of those, but they can't match all those trade-offs without compromising their strategy, their own strategy, in order to try and mimic Southwest strategy. Saw some smoke out in the other room off of where I am. So I want to make sure that that was not something that's, I want to make sure if it's there, it's supposed to be there. Can you see, and I'm going to ask you a question and look for you to respond to it. Can you see that in order to match some of the things that Southwest is doing, if somebody wanted to compete directly with them, that it would compromise the competitor strategy? I want somebody else, my throat's getting sore.
I think it would compromise the competitive strategy because Southwest has built their business based on this strategy. And if a competitor with a different foundation tries to switch, that's where I think it would make them lose money.
Well, Genesis, think about the trade unions and how they define what work crews can do on an airplane, how many
Mhm.
hours you can fly. And if you're flying long distances, how much layover time you got to have in the other city as opposed to getting to come home at night. And look at Southwest. They've got much more compatible union relations where everyone's working for a common goal, which is the success of Southwest. And where they have built flexibility into it, work with smaller crew size. Everyone gets to come home at least every other night. And uh, it's tough for the other guys to match it because they'd be running into, right away, they'd run into problems with their unions.
Mm.
So that's where the competitors really get stymied. They just can't match.
Professor, I have a question on that question. Are you
Yeah,
talking about new competitors coming in trying to replicate the something like Southwest, or like a new type of strategy?
could be both. But specifically today, I know that there's large airlines looking at Southwest and saying, man, they're making more than anybody else. And, we're not, they're covering passengers we're not getting. How can we get those same passengers?
Hmm.
And that's where the tough thing is. Now, yes, is there other plays, other strategies? How about NetJets? That's a segment of the market where people are willing to pay big bucks. I just got to get to where I want to go, and I want to do it wearing my suit and not have it look all rumpled when I get there. I want to have good food on the plane, and I don't care what the cost is. You can call NetJets and they'll have a plane ready for you in an hour. It may cost you $5,000 to go to New York.
It's like you discussed, it depends on the customer as well. I mean,
Yeah,
the targets is different. If you're thinking of a airline that does high luxury, then it's going to be specific to those customers that can pay that, versus Southwest is, it's more of the common ground. It's like saying comparing Walmart to Chanel. There's such a difference. They
yeah.
all sell clothes in theory, but one is the higher end and one is not. So I don't think, that's why I was a little bit confused on the question, if you're trying to base on Southwest or just overall the industry of the airlines, because
Actually, looking
you
overall at the industry.
just because you can go in and try to do your own different thing, because what works for Southwest may not work for others, as we've seen many times.
Well, to me, it looks like you're beginning to get the idea of how to think through the issue, the problem, and come up with solutions. And that's what employers pay big bucks to have people do. To think through the process and think of alternatives where you can make a buck. Now there was a company called MGM Airlines, and they only ran Los Angeles to New York City and back again. It was a super luxury flight, uh, very high priced, but it worked. They were for a while, and then I guess we went through a recession or something, and nobody would fly it anymore. That was probably 15 years ago. There's all kinds of ways to skin the cat. Let's see where we are. Okay, we're at trade-offs. The problem, Diana, with trying to meet these needs, the Chanel versus the Walmart, is the problem of straddling. And I showed you at least one slide where a guy was going down the hill with his skis starting to come apart, and it's tough to get them back together again. And he ended up on his rear end. And this happens, and it happened in the airline industry. It's what destroyed Continental Airlines. The carcass that's left is part of United today. But they specifically had targeted to go against Southwest, and everything they tried to do with a cheap airline ended up falling flat on its face and destroying their mainline business. you have to choose to disappoint some customers. And then you have to stick with your decision. And that means you can't deviate. That was what Continental Airlines did, is they deviated from their base strategy. Now, I flew Continental back in those glory days, and they had, on those big airplanes they had a bar restaurant kind of a thing in the back of the plane. And they actually had a full-size piano on the plane where you could go tinkle the ivories and entertain people. They didn't bring a pianist with them. It was all the flyers would have that. Big, comfortable, first-class type air seats where you could sit and chat while you got your drink from the bar that was set up as a true bar in the back of the plane. That is not a Southwest type offering. And of course, as I said, they ultimately went out of business. Now, I'm just going to show a couple more slides here and then go to this film so that you can get out on time. But feature creep, I've said this is something you have to watch out for. Southwest now allows customers to call 24 hours ahead to get in line. And the way they load you up on the plane, you're free to go any place you want, but they release a group of 25 or 30 people at a time, allow them to get seated, then release the next group. Now they're allowing you to call in 23 hours and 59 minutes before your flight time and get an A seating arrangement that you'd be in that first group. However, if you call 28 hours or 23 hours and 58 minutes, you're going to end up in the B group because everyone calls in at right at the 24-hour mark. You can also buy a position. So if you want to pay a little extra, again, they'll put you up at the beginning of the A line. With AirTran, they bought a fleet of non-Boeing aircraft along with Boeing 737s. And then AirTran serves international. Each of those is a feature that's not part of Southwest's baseline strategy. And the question for all of those, and you can mull this over yourself, the question with all those, will this dull the sharpness of their strategic arrow? So the success factor is to choose what to do and what not to do, and then stick with the decision. Now, there's a couple more slides in here, and I'm going to just skip over because we're going to look at question number 4 and number 5 with respect to IKEA in about 2 weeks. So I have a reason for showing that, but I'll catch that with IKEA as well. So that's going to bring me to a 37-minute film, and then you'll be done. Is there anyone who has any questions or comments on what I've shown you so far? Now, this is the one where I got to be careful because you'll see me up in the corner, and this will be on the permanent film, and I don't want to look like I'm a malingerer here. So this is going to take a minute for me to get this up too. So all right, let's see if I do well with this. So this is on goals and objectives. Now, at this point, what we've done is go through the Porter slides and the Porter portion, the Porter book for that matter, and see what he says. Basically, his book is providing an alternate to SWOT. rather than using those top of the mind things that you keep thinking about and don't have any basis for making the comments other than just intuition. He likes to put some kind of scientific rigor behind that. And that's why he recommends doing the 5 forces analysis, the value chain, and looking at the 5 tests of a great strategy.